counselor at the CCPD, and I specifically work with students in the School of Engineering through the CCPD, and I liaison with students that are in mechanical engineering, material science engineering, and IME, but I work with all engineering students. So I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint with you, just some interesting information on salary statistics on material science engineering, and just some of the ways that the CCPD can help you as students. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. So here we are again, Kristen Kettering from the Career Center. And let's go ahead and start. So how can the CCPD help you? So we are still up and running, even though our physical office is closed at this time. We're all working remotely. We can still help you. And how do we help? So we work with students on their resume and cover letters. We help you with any kind of interview prep at all. We can have that be formal interview prep, you know, a full-blown mock interview, or we can just kind of go over some questions with you and give you feedback. We help you with your internship search, your co-op search, and of course your full-time job search. For those of you that are wondering what's the difference between an internship and a co-op is just a longer internship. So it's typically a semester and a summer together, whereas an internship is typically just the one semester. We also help you with any offer letters that you receive. So, you know, for internships and full-time job search, any questions you have about your offer letters, or if you'd like to negotiate your salary, or just have questions about, is this salary a fair salary? We can help you with that. We can help you as well with career assessment and choosing a major. We have some different tests that you can take through the CCPD that will kind of help narrow down your interests and actually pair you to RPI majors. We can help you with the whole graduate school process, searching, applying, your essay for graduate school, your personal statement. We can help you with all of that. And of course, we can help you with any career fair prep or employer correspondence whatsoever. So just so you have an idea of what our office can help you with. So let's go right in to talk about some salary statistics for RPI material science engineering graduates. So every year our office does some statistics for students who are graduating, and this is based on what they send to us. So the average, and keep in mind, these are entry-level positions with a bachelor degree, and these are all based on RPI graduates. So the average starting salary is this right here, $66,000, almost $67,000. And the range that was reported was $65,000 to $69,000. Now, of course, that will go up with your experience level. And of course, if you go on and do a master's degree, that would also go up as well. So just keep that in mind. Another great site for you to keep in mind is Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov. They have lots of great information on there about all different areas of engineering, and really can, you know, goes through and answers questions about what is your workday like, what is the typical environment like for each of the areas of engineering. But they also do national statistics as well on salary. So the 2019 salary statistics reports a median annual salary of $93,000, excuse me, and change for materials engineers. Keep in mind, this is of all experience levels, so that's why it's a little bit higher than our statistics. Okay, so those are some salary statistics. And then we just want to let you know that we have quite a few companies that hire RPI material science students for internships and co-ops. And this is just a short little list of them. There's a lot more, but just wanted to give you a sampling of some of the companies that hire RPI students for internships and co-ops. Okay. And then I wanted to show you companies that hire RPI graduates for full-time employment. So students that are graduating from RPI with a bachelor's degree, you can see, and again, this is just a sampling. This is all just a sampling. But lots of labs, government positions, military, big companies, smaller companies, it's kind of all over the place, but they're in need, so that's good. We, use our career portal called Handshake, and within Handshake, we have lots of companies reaching out to us, wanting us to post different positions. So within Handshake, as of today, this is some of the companies that are hiring for material science engineers right now. So for internships, we have Ball Aerospace in Boulder, Colorado. They actually have 6 summer 2021 internship positions open, and it's open to material science engineers. So definitely check that out if you're looking for a summer internship on Handshake. And then Amazon Robotics, located in Boston, Mass, is looking for also 2021 summer interns for materials engineers. And then for full-time, we have an Air Force base in Oklahoma City, again, hiring multiple full-time positions for material science. So again, there's a lot more, but I just just showing you a sample. Okay, so skills to emphasize on your resume for materials. Some of this is for every engineering department, but specifically for materials, scientific and technical knowledge, your software and coding knowledge, analytical skills, data analysis, your lab skills, such as your testing, evaluating, and diagnosing problem skills, leadership, advising skills, effective organization skills, communication skills, ability to work with others. These are all things that employers would be looking for in an engineering graduate or an engineering intern, specifically materials engineering. And if you have questions about your resume or how to showcase these things, we would be happy to help you. So how do you go ahead and get help from us? How do you contact us? Again, we're all virtual now, so you would want to schedule a 30-minute appointment with us on Handshake under Career Center tab and then Appointments. There are 3 counselors that specifically work with School of Engineering students. That would be myself, Emily Sales, and Lindsay Demner, and any of the 3 of us, you can check out who has, the time that makes sense for you open. Our appointments take place through WebEx meetings, phone calls, and email consults. So if you don't have time for an actual meeting with one of us, but you just need some help, you can just sign up for an email consult, and that's a lot more flexible that way with your time. We also have a 2-hour walk-in session every single day, and that means you don't have to have an appointment. So you just meet with a counselor for 10 or 15 minutes without an appointment. On Mondays, it's 4 to 6 p.m., Tuesdays, 2 to 4, Wednesdays, 10 to 12, Thursday, 10 to 12 again, and Fridays, 12 to 2. And again, you'd go on Handshake and sign up for these. Or actually, you don't even need to sign up for them, but that's how you would find the link to get on to one of our pages, our WebEx rooms. Okay, and that's about all I have as far as the CCPD goes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And if there's any questions for me, I would be happy to help. I'm also going to type in my email address right here. So if you don't have a question for me right now, but you think of something later on, or you're a little too shy to ask right now, that's absolutely fine. You can just email me directly and I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen.
No problem.
Yeah, so just as she was saying, if anyone has any questions and you even feel a little brave enough to unmute your mic, you can certainly ask that way. But of course, we have the chat room going. So if you want to throw your question in there, you can. So, Kristen, I was wondering, While we wait to see if any students have questions. Because of COVID, it seems like there's a lot of new types of opportunities, like when it comes to remote internships. I was wondering if you had any insight on that.
Yes, I mean, a lot of companies, that's a great question. They're still hiring interns, but they're still not able, a lot of their own employees, their own full-time employees are still working virtually. So there are opportunities still, absolutely, to get internships. It's always better to have an in-person internship because you really, obviously get to work with people. You get to see the actual company and the environment and everything like that. But there's still a lot of companies that are hiring, but they're doing remote kinds of work. So, if that's something that you would be willing to do, we can certainly provide you with some resources as far as that goes. Um, specifically if there's companies you're interested in or anything like that. But companies are still hiring. So, please, I know it's it's a difficult time, but they are still hiring.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. We'll give it
Yep.
a couple more. Oh, it looks like we have a question for you. If
Sure.
we are able to get an internship over the summer, should it be related to our major?
Yes. So typically you would want an internship to be related to your major. Um, However, there are a lot of internships out there that would hire any branch of engineering student because it's a more general internship and they're just looking for students that have a basic or a foundation of an engineering background. So for instance, an aero student doesn't necessarily have to get an internship that's specifically in aero. In fact, it's very hard to do. So if we're able to get an internship just within the engineering field, even if it's not completely related or specific to your major, that's still okay. What does look a little odd is if you get an internship that has nothing to do with your major. Or is just really unrelated to your major. That does raise questions, especially for arch purposes. That's a whole other story. But for arch purposes, for it to be approved, you have to have an internship that's related to your major. I hope I answered that question.
Sounded good to me. What do you think, Connor? Does that answer your question?
Okay, good. Thank you.
Awesome.
You're
Great. Well,
welcome.
thank you so much, Kristen. Yep, just to reiterate what Connor said, of course.
Yeah.
Um, we really appreciate you, of course, spending your Monday evening, afternoon, evening with us. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Who are you back uh with us for?
I will be back for you. I think we still have IME to go, I believe.
Yes, IME is the
Yes.
very last one, so that will be
Last one. Okay.
yep. So industrial and management. So for those of you who are also considering that major, interested in that major, November 30th, we will see Kristen again.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so now is the time where we switch gears over to our panel. So I'm going to pass the reins over to my colleague, and of course, you guys now know friend Kara. Kara will have the panelists introduce themselves. They're going to speak for about 2 minutes, 2 minutes each. And then she will go into our formal Q&A. And of course, don't be shy with the questions. If you have any through tonight, we will make time at the end for those. So, Kara, it's all yours.
Thanks, Kristen. So as Kristen mentioned, I am one of the other hub advisors. I advise electrical, computer systems, and of course, materials engineering. So before I bring the panel on, every time I come to Industry Hour, I usually like to try to share at least one tip advising wise for things to look out for this year if this is a major you're really considering. And the good news for materials engineering is pretty much the only thing I would really need you to focus on is having Chemistry 1 done by the end of the year. Basically, there's a sequence that goes from Chemistry 1 to Materials Science, and then Materials Science into Structure of Materials Engineering. So if you're in Chemistry 1 right now this fall, if this is a major you're considering, definitely chat with Kristen about whether or not to do Materials Science this spring. If that works out, it can be really nice to take that first materials department class with your cohort in the fall. However, no worries if that's not where your schedule is at right now. We definitely can still get you on track if you do chemistry in the spring. So that's my main advising tip for tonight for materials. But now on to the people that you actually want to see. So would our wonderful alumni panelists please turn on their cameras? Thank you guys so much. Okay, so as Kristen mentioned, we'll take time for everyone to introduce themselves. So we'll go name, where you work, where you're from, and maybe where you're living right now. And then I think all of you went to RPI, but some of you had more than one degree here, so we'll go through that. So first, I'll just go in the order on my screen. Let's start with Mary.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, great. So I'm Mary. Hi, everyone. I work at IBM Research over at the SUNY Poly site, so right across the river from Troy. And we do semiconductor technology research there. So I live here, local in downtown Troy, and I went to RPI for my master's. Did that while working. And so I graduated in 2017 with my master's after doing my undergrad, also in materials science at MIT.
Great, thank you. And then again, just following the order on my screen, let's hear from Sarah.
Hi, so I graduated from RPI this past May, so I was class of 2020. I'm currently working in the Edison Engineering Developmental Program through GE Power. So it's basically just a rotational program where you switch positions every 6 months, and I am getting my master's through that as well, but that's through NC State. Again, it's going to be a materials science master's. I'm originally from the Schenectady area, and I'm working at the Schenectady plant, GE plant. So I am working around where I grew up. And what was the last question that I was supposed to answer?
I think you got it. You said where you work, where you're from, degrees, where you went to school. So yeah, we'll get into more later, but I think you covered the intro just fine.
All right, perfect.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, let's hear from Doug.
Good evening. I'm Doug Gross, and I'm presently president of an entity that's called New York Creates, which was created about 10 months ago to help New York State basically work on public, private, and academic partnerships and drive high-tech company growth in New York State. My arm was twisted out of retirement back in 2018 after working for many years in the semiconductor industry across Global Foundries and IBM and AMD. And so I currently am working out of Albany part-time, since most of us are working from home. And I live between Connecticut and the Adirondacks. So Albany kind of right in the middle. And I went to RPI. I have actually 4 degrees from RPI. My mother accused me of being a perennial professional student. So I have a bachelor's, master's, and came back later in my life for a PhD and an MBA from RPI.
Great, thank you all so much. So now we'll move more into the targeted question portion, I should say. So for this first question, this will actually be for all of the panelists. So for the first question, what made you decide to be a materials engineer? And maybe just to switch things up, let's go in reverse order. So we'll start with.
I guess you want to start with me. I didn't hear the end. But
Sorry.
yeah, growing up, a lot of people say they grew up taking things apart. I grew up trying to create things and make things. And so, I was always interested in manufacturing, always interested in seeing things made, so products. So materials was a great choice for me because of the interest in metallurgy. Interest in being in the core of teams that solve problems in any company that you get into that makes products. So it was a nice progression from my interest growing up from high school all the way into the early stages of college. So.
Great, thanks. And let's go then to Sarah.
So I was growing up, I always knew I wanted to do something science or engineering based. I grew up with two engineer parents, so it was always prevalent in my life. So I kind of already knew going into high school and when I started thinking about majors that I wanted to do engineering. I was lucky enough because my dad worked at the R&D center for GE, so I was able to go in and talk to a bunch of different and I think the materials science person that I talked to just really stuck in my mind. I like the way that you kind of have to look at things from a different point of view, and it's just overall a different way of thinking than a bunch of the other engineering disciplines. That really stuck with me, and so I kind of just went with it into college, and it ended up working out really well just because of my interest in chemistry and physics. It kind of blended really well with what I like to do, and ended up working out. So yeah.
Awesome. And let's go to Mary.
All right, well, I have slightly a different path. I neither like to build things, nor do I have a very strong family background in engineering. I kind of stumbled across it. I honestly thought I'd be like an art history major at some liberal arts school, but I had a high school teacher who really wanted me to consider engineering because he was a former engineer. So he had me find like an application that I was really interested in, and I was really into solar at the time, and so I found that there's a lot of engineering that obviously goes into alternative energy, and that kind of motivated me to make the switch. And I figured I'd always go back to art history later if I hated it. So stumbled across engineering, and then material science is obviously a big part of the energy space, and then I stumbled into semiconductor. So kind of take the opportunities as they come.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so next question will also be for everybody. So could you walk us through knowing that no job really truly is a typical workday, but what does a typical workday look like for you, and what are some of the responsibilities that are most frequent in your day-to-day? And let's start with Sarah.
So I think what's interesting about the rotation that I'm currently in, it's not actually a materials engineering rotation. I'm actually in a mechanical engineering position right now, and that kind of correlates with my internship that I had last summer at Corning, which was also a mechanical engineering internship. So I am primarily focusing on a lot of design aspects. So working with ANSYS or FEA or any sort of simulation software, definitely very important in my day-to-day. But overall, just kind of meeting with a bunch of different engineers, really developing my soft skills is important, especially as an engineer. Being able to kind of meet with people, understand the take that they have on things, and communicate kind of your view. I think specifically being a materials in this position, it allows me to, again, see things in a different point of view and bring forth a different way of looking at things, which I think is my team thinks is very valuable. But generally just working on a lot of design projects, meeting with a lot of groups, and yeah, I'd say that that's my typical day.
Great, thanks. And then next, let's hear from Mary.
Okay. Well, my day is a bit mixed right now. I'm still doing a bit of engineering, but I also took on a management role at the start of the year. So I have a lot of meetings in general, meeting with my team, meeting with other managers, keeping track of our progress and different programs through the day. But then because our site is also, kind of small scale manufacturing, have the kind of logistics side of things, making sure our equipment is up and engaging with the tool vendors and making sure, everything to plan there. So, that whole side of thing. And then occasionally I do still go into the clean room and help build some measurement recipes to help our team along. I do still have some technical responsibilities there. So, kind of a grab bag.
Awesome. And now over to Doug.
Well, I'm so far from engineering these days that my typical day is quite different. Let me talk a little bit about pre-COVID. Certainly, with the COVID and working from home, it's endless phone calls and Zoom, and if I can get enough bandwidth, obviously video meetings. But what I'm doing now is managing a variety of projects and programs that the core of them are here in Albany, of which Mary and IBM are one of the largest partners that we have doing research here on the Albany campus. And we also have Applied Materials and Tokyo Electron, all large players in the semiconductor equipment industry that are our partners. And so a typical day is working to make sure that operationally we're providing our partners what we need in the clean rooms and in the support. But also we have projects and programs that stretch all the way out to Buffalo with Tesla, up into the North Country with a company called Norsk Titanium, which makes 3D printing of titanium parts, to companies along the I-90 that do semiconductor packaging, Danfoss, to companies that are working here in Albany to do power electronics, Cree, and working with them to build a manufacturing facility in Marcy, New York. So my day is managing a lot of different pieces, and unfortunately for the first year or so was picking up some of the pieces from the past. So I enjoy fixing things, but this has been a challenge in a different way for me.
For sure. And I think it's so great that we basically have kind of 3 different career phases that the students can hear from. So kind of see all the different ways things can progress. So awesome. So now move to a couple of more targeted questions. So first is for Mary. So something I noticed while looking at your resume and writing these questions are that you have put out several publications during your career. So could you maybe tell us about 1 or 2 of them that you really particularly enjoyed, and just how you went about getting published as a professional?
Sure. So, so I do have a number of publications that I've been able to get out in the past 5 or 6 years that I've been with IBM. I'd say I've had the caveat that, unlike academia, where a lot of people value very short author lists, industry papers tend to have very long author lists due to the nature of at least the kind of environment that I work in. So everyone's doing their piece that they're an expert in, rather than like in grad school where you do everything from start to finish yourself. So that's been interesting, publishing in industry. I'd say my favorite paper was honestly the first one where I was a co-author, because I still hadn't even had my master's at that point. So it's really like a groundbreaking moment for me to have a first author paper so early on in my career. And it was still kind of early in applying machine learning to some data that we were gaining in the fab to help predict the electrical test results of some of our structures using our measurement data. So that was really interesting, and it got a really good response. And so that was my first time at a big conference presenting and publishing. So that was a really nice experience. And I had a great team kind of supporting me and teaching me what I would have learned, I guess, in grad school otherwise. So, yeah, and I'd say, you know, not every industry publishes, but, you know, especially for us, where we're doing kind of foundational R&D, you know, we value publications where we can get them.
Great, thank you. And then next targeted question is for Doug. So looking at your resume, it looks like you began your career spending over 20 years working your way up at IBM. And then the second half of your career, it looks like you got the chance to take on leadership roles at different and exciting companies at a pace of every couple of years, I'd say. So having had both experiences, what would you say are some of the pros and cons of a long-term tenure at one company versus moving around a little more, and maybe what you gained in learning through both of those?
Sure. Yeah. My career with IBM, actually I had two. I left and came back. Was really, I think, very powerful for me in terms of being at a company that was so broad at the time in terms of working in many technology areas. So anything of interest, it seemed to be there. If you had very, very difficult problems to solve with a company of IBM, the hardest part was finding somebody who really understood the technical area and could help you. And there was always somebody seemingly someplace in the world from an IBM standpoint to do that. So, and then what I gained from IBM was really a very solid, as Mary, I think will find out, a very solid managerial experience in terms of the education and management, and not just how IBM does it, but how the world does it in terms of best practices. And also, you know, to develop that and to move from one technology area to another in increasingly larger and more responsibility and leadership roles was fun, but also a great foundation for what then came, which were some more, I'll call, startup-oriented type experiences. Maybe they were large startups. We helped found Global Foundries, which was more like 11,000 people as a startup, but not all the pieces were there. So it was putting together a company on the fly as fast as possible. And again, using that experience that I gained from the many years at IBM to do that. And then after that, it was more of consulting and technical advising for other companies to try to provide some, you know, growth and feedback to their path forward. So not one or the other is necessarily good, bad, or indifference, but it's all the combinations of the experiences that you get from those that you can use to build upon as you move through your career.
Great, thank you. And then next question is for Sarah. So something I saw looking through your resume was that as an undergrad here at RPI, you participated in quite research projects, and that's something students talk about all the time. So could you tell us about your favorite one, if there is a favorite, and how you got involved with different research projects you did on campus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I initially started doing research projects because my dad works in the chemical engineering department at RPI. So he basically kind of just asked around and saw if anybody needed some help with their research, just because I was looking for some experience coming out of high school. And I knew that that was a great way to get experience and exposed to a lot of different projects and things along those lines. So my first project he found for me ultimately. But once I kind of broke in and knew the professors, because this was before I went to RPI, I was able to just kind of talk to professors and see who had what projects going on and who could use some help. So basically, I'd say if you are looking for undergraduate research, the best thing to do is honestly just go talk to professors, because a lot of times they do have projects lined up and they're more than willing to find you something if they don't, by just like asking other professors. That's how I kind of broke into the materials department, because I was originally working in the chemical one. Just went and talked to my professors and saw if they needed to do, they needed help with anything, and one of them did, so I ended up working for one of their projects. I'd say that my favorite project I worked on was the summer after my sophomore year. It was a really thermodynamics-based project itself, but the bulk of the work I was doing was involving MATLAB, which was basically the bane of my existence before this project. I hated it so much. And I think it was really a time for me to kind of embrace my weakness in coding. And after that summer, it's definitely more of a strength of mine. And especially from a material standpoint, we don't code that much. So being able to have that extra skill set is definitely really, really vital, and looks good in a lot of standpoints. So I would say if you do choose materials or another major in general that doesn't involve coding, just with today's day and age, and engineering, you're probably going to end up using it at some point anyway. So try to get any experience that you can, even just like I did through a research project or any other outside project that you can, because it is really important.
Great, thank you. And I can definitely second what Sarah said. As the advisor for materials, they are one of the most active departments that I've worked with in terms of really wanting to get undergraduates involved in research. So definitely don't feel intimidated to reach out and ask. They are very much into that. So while you all were speaking, I thought there were interesting things you all said that I wanted to ask some follow-up questions about. So the first one for Mary was, you mentioned that recently you progressed from your first job at IBM into a more managerial role. So how would you say your responsibilities transitioned as you stepped into that role? And maybe for students who obviously are thinking of working up the ladder over their career, do you have any specific tips or advice?
Yeah, so my evolution into this role, it's been slower than maybe some other transitions, because instead of taking over, an entirely different group to manage, I'm managing the group that I came from, which people will sometimes tell you is good or bad depending on their past experiences. But in my case, I thought it was really a good fit, and it also worked out really well because I started this role right at the end of January, so right before COVID hit. So I already had all these relationships with all my engineers from being an engineer in the team for so many years. So I wasn't starting from scratch, which I think was really useful in this remote environment, where everyone was unsettled, and you have to, be there as a leader for your team. It's definitely been a transition. I think, managing a team is a challenge, because, especially coming from the team, your little segment of it, and you generally know what other people are doing, but if you see someone else doing something else that you don't necessarily agree with, you're like, oh, well, that's their problem. It's not my problem. But now it's my problem. Everyone's problems are my problem. But also everyone's successes and accomplishments are mine as well. So it's really, keeping that in perspective and trying to just enable people to do their best work, and make it a good place to work, and a fulfilling career for them as well. That's what really convinced me to take the job.
Absolutely, thank you. And then Doug, so one thing you mentioned was, of course, that you started with IBM, which is a huge, super long-term, well-established company, and then you got to experience a bit more of the startup culture in your future role. So that's something students hear about a lot, the idea of what is startup culture, how does that compare to maybe a more typical corporate culture? So in your experience, what are some of those differences in experience depending on which type of company they end up with. You're still muted.
How's that? Much better, huh? An established company like IBM, obviously, as I talked about before, the resources are very, very broad, very, very deep. And, the capability of working with very innovative and, all types of people is very rewarding in the sense of whether you're working as part of a team or, as now Mary has experienced, leading a team. There are different successes associated with that. A startup is, to me, much more hands-on. You're responsible for yourself and what you're trying to accomplish, but don't necessarily have the deep resources. And then resources could be people, they could be equipment, they could be money. So it's a very different culture to start from and learn from. And I often thought that being in a startup culture, you may not have time to learn and necessarily, accomplish what you want to, and make the steps in your career that you want to go after. So I always thought that starting with a larger company where the resources are available and the projects are clear and the goals and the deliverables are there was a good place to get the learning and the experience, and then move into more of the startup phase where you use that experience to drive yourself forward.
Great, thank you. I think that's really interesting perspective and good for students to know. And then Sarah, one of the things I wanted to follow up and ask you about was you mentioned you're in this really interesting rotational program, and that part of that it is embedded with getting your master's degree. Could you maybe expand a bit on how that piece is woven in? Does the company sponsor it? Are you a part-time student throughout? Will there be a phase where you stop working for a bit and complete the classes for your degree? How does it all work?
That's a good question. So it's actually sponsored through GE. So it's like actually a part of the program itself. It's interwoven into it basically. So it works out really well with my work schedule. We basically we don't do like typical classes our first year. It's basically a 1 4-hour class each week, and you cover a new topic. And then you have groups outside or groups in the program. You have to hand in your homework before the following class. And so it's basically just a cycle of having class, doing your homework, and then continuing on from there. And that's just your first year. In your second year, you do a project-based course where you actually do basically a research or thesis project incorporated with the work that you are currently working on. It just basically has to be a long-term project. It has to be like 6 months long or something like that. And then you ultimately, in your second year, you also take online classes through NC State. And then after that, I will graduate with my master's.
Very cool. That sounds like it really, makes it reasonable to balance with everything you're doing. And then you get that real-time work school application thing going on. So very good for telling us that. Okay, so now we'll transition back more to questions for the panel as a whole. So for the next one, what would you say is your favorite part of your job? Or if that's a little too specific, maybe just your favorite part of going into materials as a whole. So let's start with Jeff.
Well, I think the favorite part I have of being in materials is what I said before, is I enjoy developing and manufacturing products, making things. And whether you're a part of a team or leading a team that does that, what's very rewarding to me is to see those products in the marketplace, to see those products in a phone or in a computer or in whatever you were working on. To me, that is the ultimate reward, is you did that with a group of people, solved the problems, met the schedule, and allowed that product to get into the marketplace. So that, to me, has always been a favorite part of whatever I've done in my career.
Absolutely. And Mary, what would you say is your favorite part?
I think one thing that really drew me to materials specifically and kept me here was the fact that it's such a broad and interdisciplinary major. I feel like, even in just the past few years in particular, like every major starts adding a materials science type class if they don't cross-register, because it really provides such a nice framework for thinking about how everything interacts. Thinking about the literal materials and then also the structural implications and then all the different aspects of properties and how different materials interact. That's at the foundation of so many other engineering disciplines. And so I think it gives you the tools to solve lots of different kinds of problems. And that's kind of a really interesting skill set to have. So yeah, that's why I chose materials and stuck with it.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, what's been your favorite part of being a materials engineer so far?
I think kind of going off of what Mary had to say, I really love the fact that it's applicable to basically any discipline or area you're going to work in. It always has an application just because no matter what engineering project you're working on, there's going to be some sort of materials there. And so it really makes you valuable in a lot of senses because you can work with any sort of group and your knowledge is really just, it's applicable in any case. So that's what I really like about it. And that's kind of what I found with going off of my research projects and things along those lines. All of my research projects had very different topics, but they were all very materials based. And I love that I was able to get such a vast background in a lot of different topics, but still kind of keep the focus on materials.
Great, thank you. And then next question for the whole panel is, do you have any additional advice for students who are considering materials engineering that we haven't been able to hit in another question? So I guess to start, keep the same order now. So we'll start with Mary.
Yeah, so I guess I was hoping this kind of question would be next, because the same answer I had before is also my answer for this. Material science is a really broad field, so you need to kind of start figuring out, if you choose this route, what area you might want to dive into deeper, right? I think, both personally and then as I continue to interview students for internships and other positions, maybe more than some other majors, we tend to have a challenge of, there are so many options, what do I do? And you tend to be more of a generalist and not a specialist. So you kind of need to think about what you enjoy working on, what your skill sets are, what you're interested in, and try and hone that interest into maybe some specific industries or fields, or at least types of work, to help define what you want to do with this degree. Because it can be kind of amorphous at the end of the day if you don't have that direction.
Awesome, thank you. And Doug, do you have any advice that you'd like to share?
Well, it's, I think, choosing materials, which, as we talked about, is at the core of most of the problems or products that you may work on. What I chose in materials, I never ended up using when I first started my career at IBM. I came out of strengthening the materials and titanium-based materials, and ended up in the first job working on thin films. Just because it was titanium, it was only a few atoms thick. They thought maybe I could help there. So it does evolve, but as long as you get the basic strength in terms of knowing what's going on and knowing when people are telling you the truth or when people don't know what they're talking about. I think that's the important piece, is having that foundation that you can work with people, work with teams, and put together what's needed in order to be successful in anything that you're given.
Thank you. And Sarah, any advice for these students considering materials?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep mine RPI specific just because I did just graduate, so it is really fresh in my mind. But I would say what I loved about materials specifically at RPI was it is a smaller major, so it's a very close-knit group of students, and actually you're really close with the professors as well, just because ultimately there's one class and it's that class throughout, all of your classes, and you get to know all these people really well. So basically the advice I'd give is if you do end up choosing materials, definitely take advantage of that. Work with, your peers and really get to know them, because you're going to face like a bunch of difficult classes that it feels like you can't get through on your own. And a lot of times those groups of people are going to help you get through it. So definitely take advantage of that. And that kind of stands for any major at RPI. Just take advantage of the people around you, because it's really going to help you through when you do face those hard classes.
Absolutely. We hear that a lot as hub advisors, that study groups are basically the way you survive engineering. So thank you for backing that up. Okay. Then next question for the full panel is, what do you wish you knew as a first-year college student that you do know now? I guess I'll give a couple seconds to think about it. And then whenever you're ready, again, we'll just stick with the same order for simplicity's sake. We can start with Mary.
Sure. As a first year college student, my first year, I think I boxed myself into my own perspective of what I could do. And it really wasn't until maybe my junior year that I tried coding as an example. I thought, all these kids in computer science, they've been dabbling in this in high school or since they were younger or whatever. Like, I'm not going to take a coding course because I know literally nothing about it. And so I kind of wasted those years just letting myself shut myself down. But then once I tried it, I was like, oh, I'm actually, enjoying this and I'm kind of good at it. So, I think college is a great time to explore those things and don't let yourself limit yourself, take those chances. If it's something you think is interesting, try it out and you might like it. But don't let yourself be the reason you don't try it.
Absolutely. And then how about you, Doug?
Well, I grew up in a small town in central New York, and the next stop was Troy, New York, a little further down to the east. And what I think I wish I had known or opened my eyes a little bit more about was it's a big world. It's not just about engineering. It's not just about science. And obviously that's where I was focused, but I wish I had done more to explore the humanities and social science, because later in life some of your career capabilities take you around the world, and it's good to know about other cultures and how people evolved over time in those cultures. So I think it's important to get the basics and get a solid foundation in materials and engineering, but there is a much broader world out there that you can build off of.
Absolutely. And I feel like we probably hear that at least 3 or 4 times a year when we run Industry Hour from different alumni. So it seems to be a common thread. So thank you for sharing. And then Sarah, I imagine this is relatively fresh for you. So anything you wish you knew in your first year that you know now?
I would definitely say try to really take things in stride and keep things in perspective, because it's really easy when you do bad on one test in one class to get extremely overwhelmed and kind of like hate yourself for a minute, but you kind of have to remind yourself it's one test. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to destroy your GPA or destroy your career. So definitely try to take things into perspective, and everyone's going to struggle every once in a while, or with a whole class. It's understandable. Like you can't understand everything, so just be realistic that you're not always going to be the smartest in the room. You're not always going to feel like you can do it, but that's not unusual, and just keep pushing through and you'll be okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then looks like we'll probably have time for at least definitely one more question, probably two, before we move on to student questions. So as a friendly reminder to the students watching, if you have questions for our panelists, please drop them into the chat, and me and Kristen will make sure to ask them at the end, which will be in about 7 minutes for this portion. It's a lot more fun when I don't have to keep making questions up. So come up with some, and we can make sure to get them in there. So for the next question, again, for the whole panel, thinking back on your time in college, was there any specific class that stands out as your favorite, or maybe one that was particularly impactful that you might not have expected? It could be materials, it could be something completely unrelated to your major. But since this one might be a little bit of a surprise since it was from one of the other documents, I guess if anybody has something, feel free to unmute and start us off. That way, if anyone else needs a moment to think, they can have that.
Well, for me, it's hard to remember back that far.
I can start that question if you don't want to, Doug.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. I'd say that my favorite course at RPI was Mechanical Properties of Materials. I took it my sophomore year. So I would definitely say that class, just because it was the first real materials class I took. And it was really exciting to actually be learning things in my major. And I'd say, I don't know, that class definitely confirmed things for me that I was in the right place. So I think that was my favorite course.
Great. And then did you have one in mind, Doug, or?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite courses, and I'm not even sure it's still there today, was in the area of welding metallurgy. There was a very famous professor, Professor Savage, who taught that, and in the materials department. And it was a very much of a hands-on, learning experience that, again, welding later in your life is, believe it or not, an important thing to understand and know, and it's kind of fun to do, and that's how you make things.
Awesome. Sounds super fun and hands-on. And then, Mary, did you have any class that stood out as a favorite, or maybe a good surprise in terms of its impact?
Yeah, I had one class. I was thinking back, I don't think it was mechanical properties. I think it was like structural properties, so slightly different. It was like a junior year class in undergrad, and I just remember it being really interesting because the professor brought in so many real life examples, and like we basically mapped out the tensors on like a honeycomb, and I don't know, I just remember it being really interesting how easily you could deconstruct everything. And I actually really dislike physics, at least structural physics, so that class made it really relatable for me, and helped me enjoy it. I'm much more on the chemistry end of material science than the physics end. So
Awesome. And it looks like we'll have time for one more question before we get to the student questions, which I see there is one. Love it. So keep them coming, guys. So let's see. I was just looking at something over here. So one thing that students start to think a little bit about at this point is what sort of lifestyle they can expect with different majors. And for example, I used to advise chemical engineers, so a lot of them had to consider where they would live regionally, because a lot of the jobs were often concentrated in one area of the country or required long months out on a rig. So would you say, for any of you, that there are any maybe lifestyle expectations that students might want to consider when thinking about materials engineering. But I do know you all said that the field is pretty broad, so this might just be a non-starter. But
I could go first, I guess. So if you do work in a manufacturing type environment, especially one that's 24/7, there is some expectation of off hours work. And I think that's something to be mindful of, how you want your work-life balance to be. So, I mean, obviously every company is different, whether they do shifts or, you know, working business hours and then just check in offline when you have big deadlines or whatever the case may be. But, you know, especially I think in manufacturing, understanding that there can be some unusual schedules.
absolutely. And it's slightly related, but I can definitely vouch for my husband is a process engineer, but works in a manufacturing plant. So his shift specifically has to straddle first and second shift and more like 7:30 to 3:30. So definitely a good point. If you go into manufacturing, you definitely might have opportunities for very cool schedules, but more unique than maybe your 9 to 5. So very good point. Anything that either Sarah or Doug would like to add?
Well, manufacturing also is around the world. So it may not be just 24/7 here in New York. It's in Asia or in Europe. And, you know, sometimes the day is very, very long in terms of trying to pull teams together to really stay on top of things. So, but that's true, I think, with any manufacturing job. But, you know, I ended up I ended up interviewing at IBM in California. I ended up at IBM in New York, and the lifestyle was I wanted to stay in New York, and so that was the choice I started with.
Great. And Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I guess just going off of that, like even, you know, in design, I work with teams in Mexico and in Germany and Switzerland. So really just like, you know, there is like sometimes some time strain trying to fit in meetings with those different teams. But other than that, I'd say materials in general, if, you know, if you want to go to a specific part of the country, I can't see it like being an issue trying to find a job out there. It is very flexible with you know, different positions or different companies. So that's definitely one of the benefits of materials, I would say.
Great, thank you. And with that, we are officially on to the student question portion. And Kristen told me that there is one that I can't see in the general chat, so we're going to start with that.
Yes, thank you, Kara. So, very early on, we got a question wow, I really can't talk today. We got a question from a student who had to leave a little bit early. So he's going to watch the recording later in order to get his answer. But he wondered how much design work as opposed to lab work do materials engineers do?
I can start with that question, I guess. So me specifically being in a design position right now, I haven't been in the lab at all. And with the position I'm currently in, I won't be in the lab at all. I'm purely doing design work. So, but we chose our rotations for our second rotations, and I'll purely be in the lab for that one doing materials work. And I can guarantee I won't be doing any design work. So I think it really just depends on the position that you take. If you want to go more of a design route, you can. If you want to go more of a, you know, a lab-based workplace, then you can definitely do that as well. It really just depends on what you want to do.
Awesome, thank you. Had trouble hitting my mute button there. Mary or Doug, do you have anything to add?
Well, you know, starting off in the semiconductor industry, you know, most of what I worked on, I don't know if I would call it laboratory work, but it was hands-on, either in manufacturing or in a pilot line. And so more of that was, you know, true experimental stuff related to that area and less around what I would call true design. The materials we knew we wanted to try to integrate were well known, and we chose off the periodic table as much as we could, but most of that was really laboratory oriented work.
Yeah, and then I guess for me, I would say I spent at least half my time either in the fab or doing, data analysis in my prior role. So going and hands-on, updating measurements or collecting new data.
Great, thank you all. And then there is a student question in the chat. So I think it'll be interesting, again, with everyone in slightly different phases in their career to hear perspectives on this one. What made you choose industry over academia? And let's maybe start with Doug.
Well, when I came out of college, you have to remember the time frame. The Vietnam War was going on, and one of the major focuses of many of us was how do we get a job? And so, industry was booming at the time. And as I said, I ended up in a completely different place from what I had done my PhD work in, and ended up, with 30 years in the semiconductor industry because it's one of the more interesting areas. So, today I see in the position I have kind of straddling a bit of the academic work that goes on around New York State and around the country and around the globe. Again, I think for my type of personality, I think industry was the place to be. Get something done, get things made, and get on with it in terms of the execution of the plan that you put together. Whereas I find academics like to study things and ask more questions.
That makes sense. And then Mary, how about you? What made you decide between academia and industry?
I feel very much the same way, like personality wise. I think that helps dictate a lot of it, whether you're kind of looking for the fast paced execution mode or the sit back and think about things and try different, experiments here and there. Plus my husband's an academic, so I see the flip side and I'm happy with my choice. So
Very fair. And then Sarah, obviously you're fresh out of undergrad, so I guess a slightly different spin on the same question is, do you ever have any thoughts about potentially pivoting back to academia? Are you pretty industry is good, that's the plan?
I think working on undergrad projects, the one thing I realized is I don't ever want to get my PhD. I think, again, just going off of what the other two said, I'm definitely more like I want to work on something and see it ultimately like the application and the impact it has. And I think that academia, you can, make an impact with something, but it takes a much longer amount of time. And definitely I am more impatient than a lot of people, I'd say. So I like, the quick pace and applying something and seeing it, being used and being done with something. So definitely, I don't think I'll go back into academia at all.
Absolutely. And sometimes for college, it's just as important to learn what you don't like as what you do like. So with that being said, we're kind of close to the end here. So I'm just going to give like a quick, awkward 20-second pause for students. If you guys have any other questions, we do have a few minutes left. So I'll give a quick break if you just want to type something. But otherwise, we'll probably be wrapping up shortly. So again, I'll give a quick pause. So if anyone's typing, they have a chance to get it out and see where we go. If any other questions come up, I think I can safely speak on Kristen's behalf and say that if you would like to email her your questions, she would be able to pass them along and get you some answers. But otherwise, thank you all for attending Materials Industry Hour. And Kristen, would you like to let them know what's coming and send us off?
Yeah, thank you, Kara. So next week, we actually don't have an industry hour. For those of you in Engineering 1700, I believe you're going to be learning about ROTC. Is that where we're at? And then we only have a couple left. We have Aero, and as discussed earlier, we have IME right at the end. So we are making progress through industry hour. Tomorrow, as always, I will be sending the follow-up email that includes, of course, contact information to Kristen, our CCPD counselor, and then any of our panelists who were comfortable sharing their contact information. So you guys always have that where you can reply back. And I think that's where we're at tonight. So if you're all good, have a wonderful evening. I am so grateful to our panelists. It was wonderful to listen to the diversity and what you guys are doing right now. And I think it's really incredibly helpful. Well, for me, and then of course, I speak on behalf of the students then as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Yep.
Bye.
Thank you all for
Right.
coming. Have a great night.